Welcome, welcome, welcome to Krononaut Chronicles. My name is Bill, and I will be your guide on this particular Sonic adventure. The show is, of course, sponsored by mysticalwares.com. That is Derek Condit's online metaphysical supply shop. Derek is not here with us this evening, but I am joined by Ben. Ben, thank you for being here. Ben's here. Just gonna
Yep, thanks for the invite again. Always happy to come into interesting conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. And I am also joined by special guest Chrononauts from the Boundless Authenticity podcast, Jehan Sattaur. Jehan, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And it's been a while since we talked. I just want to make sure I'm getting your name right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool. So yeah, Jehan, you have been a guest on 13 Questions, which is the show that Adam and I did before Chrononaut Chronicles. Adam might pop in later. I'm not sure, but we'll see. So what is it exactly that we do here on Krononaut Chronicles? Well, for the longest time, up until the last episode, really, I was calling this a spell. I was calling it a working. But after having some discussion with Ben, we kind of came to the conclusion that there really is no omega to the working. So this has become more of like I'm trying to find like a new word for it other than working, right? And the only thing that comes to mind right now is blueprint, right? So I guess we could say there's four steps to this blueprint or four components to this working your spell because every spell has components to it, right? And so I've turned these into our show segments, and we have four of them, and they are the awareness segment, armor segment, augmentation, and anchor. And so the end goal of all this is being to give us a blueprint for increasing our efficiency in timeline navigation. So I'll explain kind of the idea behind each segment as we go. So I'll intro them as we go. And the first segment is awareness, and this is based heavily on the awareness segment and the armor or the anchor segment. Excuse me. The awareness and anchor segment are heavily influenced by a ancient Toltec wisdom tradition. It's the one that Don Miguel Ruiz talks about in his book, The Four Agreements. And within this wisdom tradition, there are three masteries that, in order to be a Toltec, you must pursue, right? And the first one is the mastery of awareness, right? So this component, this segment is kind of structured around bringing our attention to who we are, right? Answering that question, like who are we? Bringing awareness of self. So knowing thyself, which is something that just occurred to me today while getting ready for the show, that this mastery of awareness and this inscription that we find on, I think it's the Oracle of Delphi in Greece. We're basically talking about the same thing, right? We have this South American ancient wisdom tradition that is connected to this oracle in Greece. I think that's pretty cool. So, but in the greater question of who we are the hero of our own stories, right? But we are also the author, the editor, and the publisher. So we're all of it in one. Um, so in order to bring our attention to this fact, I've been kind of sharing a quote from Mr. Rogers. Shahan, do you remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood growing up?
Yeah, I remember Mr. Rogers. Yeah.
Good, good. It's a show. It's a very wholesome show, and it's not anything that you can really see too much on television anymore. Wholesomeness. You do a little bit in some movies, depending on who's acting in them. But what I would like for this podcast to emulate is, just a wholesome little ear candy that you can put in your daily, weekly rotation or whatever to help give you a little boost, right? But there's this one quote in particular from Mr. Rogers, and I'll share it now. He says, as human beings, our job in life is to help people realize how rare and valuable each one of us really is. That each of us has something that no one else has or ever will have, something inside that is unique to all time. It is our job to encourage each other to discover that uniqueness and to provide ways of developing its expression. So, in the spirit of that quote and of Mr. Rogers, we have been doing self-compliment exercises on the awareness component of the show. So, I did not tell Jehan about this beforehand, so kind of springing this on you last minute, but it's no pressure. I'll go first, and then Ben will share, so you'll have some time to think if you need to think about a self-compliment. Um, so yeah, my compliment this week or this episode was going to be that I'm a consistent person. I can be a consistent person, right when we uh, actively choose to pursue something, I can be consistent and disciplined, right? And this came to mind because I've been using a an app on my phone recently just to help with my morning stretching, and it comes with it's through my day job, and so it comes with some support on the back end for like physical therapists and whatnot. So I've been working with them, tweaking some stretching routines and whatnot, and seeing some results, and I'm happy about it. So I could say that I'm a consistent person because I think that consistency breeds results that you can see, and I'm feeling better in the mornings from having stretching throughout the day, right? So this is kind of a confirmation and an affirmation. It kind of plays like a dual role here, which I think is cool. So we're doing not only compliments but affirmations. So um, yeah, that was mine. If Ben wanted to share next, or if Jahan, if you had one ready to go, either of you can jump in or not.
All right, so who's going first, me or Ben?
Uh,
Well, I uh Bill sprung this on me a couple episodes back, and I'm still not super good at it. I'm not comfortable with it, which I find interesting, and I'm trying to look at from all angles now, but um I hadn't thought about it today. So I can go with something up that's kind of on top of mind and say that I realized recently with a new job, I have really strong hands, and it's been coming in handy. So I can compliment myself on
You got the death grip.
that.
it's
Very nice.
punny.
Yeah. Well, I started a new job this spring as a gardener. Um, More than anything, just because it sounded fun, and it's really enjoyable, and getting more into the plant world has been endlessly fascinating. So
Hell yeah. I bought a kettlebell recently, so I've been working on my forearm exercises, strengthening my hands as well. Apparently, there's something to do with grip strength and longevity, as in like you'll live longer if you can grip things stronger. So yeah,
Yeah,
go
it's
strong.
true. I do a lot of pull-ups and I hang a lot, so I can tell you that, since I've been on that journey for the past couple of years, I've felt actually a lot better, which is strange.
That's good though. I would love to do more pull-ups and dead hangs, but I have one of those just the bars that sit in the top of a door, right? It hooks in to the
Hmm.
frame, and I'm super tall, so I have to like lift my knees up, so I can't do, I don't know, it's weird. Can't do the dead hang properly without being higher off the ground. I guess I could. I don't know. Yeah, something to
Yeah.
work on. But anyway, do you have,
Anyways,
yeah.
yeah, so the self-compliment thing. Um, What was interesting about when you gave yours, Bill, was that you listed a value to compliment yourself because consistency is really a value. Discipline is a value. You have to really want to become those attributes in order to execute them on a daily basis, right? So I figured in the same vein as you, I would choose authenticity, right? Because that's my brand, boundless authenticity, right? So I pretty much just keep it real. And that's one of the things.
Oh no, you cut out.
What's the last thing you heard?
That's one of the things.
I said that's one of the things that I've always loved about myself. I've always been authentic and real and never really tried to sugarcoat anything or be fake with people or anything like that. And it takes work because sometimes, you do have to be careful with your words and stuff, but it takes a lot of work to be authentic and just continue to show up that way. So it's one of those things about me that I really like.
Hell yeah, dude. And I love your podcast too. You want to tell us a little bit about what you have going on over there? I've noticed that you've kind of taken your foot off the accelerator a little bit this year, not too much, but what's happening?
Yeah, well, in reality, Boundless Authenticity just started as a extension of my coaching business. And what I wanted to do was answer the questions that I personally had when I began the journey, like when I had my so-called spiritual awakening. So I wanted to provide those same answers and have certain guests on that could just fill those gaps for people. And I've just basically, like you said, taken my foot off the gas because I don't have any more questions that the old me would have wanted answered. And there's just a few things that I have left to say, but I am going to do like a lot more of just me talking and things like that. And I have a few people coming on to talk about ETs and stuff later on. But as of right now, I just want to take it very, very slow with anything else because and then this is a controversial opinion, but as usual, I got to keep it real. When I'm dealing with clients and stuff, the first thing I notice is that none of this spiritual stuff, none of this ET stuff, none of this esoteric shit, none of that matters to their growth and healing. Like they have to do a lot of processing and a lot of uh self-assessment and a lot of self-regulation. None of that stuff really comes in handy to them.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
I'm really wanting to do is provide more value in terms of those things rather than worry about conspiracies or the freaking aliens or whatever, you know?
Yes.
So, um, that's really what it's all about at this point. If I have something to say that can explain something, then for sure I'll be doing that. But I'm not in a hurry to have too many guests on to talk about all that other stuff. There's plenty of content on the internet, and everything that needs to be said has already been said.
Yeah.
There's only going to be new people showing up to the party that haven't heard before, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely can jive with that. I'm glad that your project is evolving. This one, I mean, you've seen me evolve from 13 questions into this, and now this is evolving and still not done, right? I don't know what its final form is going to be yet, but yeah, I think that's awesome that you're kind of recalibrating uh, your objective there. And you're absolutely right. All of this, the new age woo-woo stuff doesn't, it's not really practical, right? You can't really do anything with it to implement into your own life to make a change. So absolutely. And then yeah, there's tons of other podcasts that talk about these current events and have other guests on that are experts in whatever topic and they do deep dives like that. All that stuff is pretty much taken care of, right? And what's left is just, you know, more about how can we turn service to self into service to others, or even vice versa in the context of like crafting a podcast or whatever. But yeah, we do cover a few headlines and current events in the augmentation component of the show, which is uh, where we will get into the topic of the brain, which is why I wanted to have you on to begin with, because I've heard you talk about that before and you seem very knowledgeable, and I wanted to pick your brain about the brain. But before we get into the augmentation component, we still have to do the armor segment. So this is the second step in the blueprint, if you will. So first we wake up, we become aware, and then we move on to armoring ourselves. And so before I did a lot of the restructuring to the segments, this was the gratitude segment, which you may or may not remember from the 13 questions podcast. But that practice got a little old and frankly too easy. And to go back to Ben's comment about not uh, being 100% comfortable with the self compliment exercise in the last segment. Um, oh yeah, I lost my train of thought. The gratitude wasn't as challenging, right? So I thought doing the self compliment thing would be a little bit more challenging, and it's proving to be so, I think. But anyway, the aim of this segment is still essentially the same. We want to talk about the heart-brain connection and using love, that energy to metaphysically armor ourselves. And this is a tip that I learned from Derek years ago, and that would be just to imagine like a buckyball in the center of your chest and like where your heart area is, and then you would slowly expand that out until it is enveloping your whole being, right? So you're essentially running around in a like a little hamster ball wheel thing. And this is a metaphysical container that holds our thought energy. And you want to do this every 24 hours or so to kind of keep it fresh. So like every day, right? Once a day. It only, takes 3 to 5 minutes. You don't have to spend like 2 hours in meditation or whatnot. But a small little synchronicity in doing research for this subject. I've been leaning heavily on the heartmath.org uh, institute or website. Uh, Greg Braden does a lot of work with them, but in 1991 was when the term heart brain was coined, and the man who coined it was Dr. Armour. His name was Dr. J. Andrew Armour. So we've got the Armour segment with Dr. Armour. But yeah, he showed that the heart's complex nervous system qualified it as a little brain. The heart actually sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. The heart sends out an electromagnetic field that changes with your emotions, and this field can be measured up to several feet away. So just an interesting side note in the ability to be measured up to several feet away. If you've ever got a biofield tuning session, your practitioner will say that your aura or your field extends spherically around your body for about 6 feet, right? And at the very edge of that field is your gestation period, where is before you entered into this world, right? You're kind of still in the womb. And as we move in from the outer edges of this magnetic field, we come closer and closer to the present until you reach your body, which is the now state, right? So I thought that was kind of neat. Um, the previous couple episodes, we've gone over some breathing techniques that you can use to help engage your heart brain. I don't have anything prepared for this week, just because there's a lot of other stuff to get to in the augmentation and the anchor segment. So um, the armor segment is really just supposed to be a short little exercise, not unlike the awareness segment, to kind of bring our hearts and our minds together, our heart brain and our brain, get those moving in the same direction, right? And this brings us to the augmentation component. So, what is augmentation? To augment is to enlarge something or to add to it. So, what exactly are we augmenting here? Well, in a way, we're augmenting our perspective. We're going to cover some current events. So, we're augmenting our knowledge. And since knowledge, knowing is half the battle, knowledge is power, we can say that we're augmenting our power in a roundabout way, right? So, there are a few topics that I keep an eye out for when perusing uh, through Azazel Telegram. And these are anything to do with like monetary or Bitcoin policies, BRICS, gold standard, the death of the dollar, right? Anything to do. So that's one category I'll keep an eye on. I look at moon and space disclosure, right? ETs. I also look for signs of degrading public support or engagement in things such as established authority, um, power centers like the medical complex or the religious complex or the monetary system, right? So the death of authority in general. And then I also try to look out for tech transfers. So generally, this is what I try to cover when we do headlines. We have done in the past some mini classes provided by Azazel on the four factions, so the four flavors of wizardry. Those were a really cool little mini series. If you haven't heard that, you can go back and check that out. But for today, we're going to do headlines, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the brain at the end, which is going to be a perfect segue into the anchor segment. So as I'm going through these, you guys can jump in whenever you want, give your opinion, uh, comment, whatever. If you want the sources to the articles, you can find them in the Krononaut Chronicles Telegram page. I have them all saved there. So this first one, we're going to start out with some good news. This is just from MSN.com. And they have apparently discovered a new type of fungus which eats plastic. Have you guys heard of this before? Fungus eating plastic or bacteria eating plastic?
I think I just saw that yesterday.
Yeah, it's a super new story. I try to keep these, recent. So these will be new from our last recording up until, the release of this one. But yeah, this is some good news. The discovery was made by marine microbiologists from the Royal Netherlands Institute for Sea Research in cooperation with colleagues from Utrecht University, the Ocean Cleanup Copenhagen, and St. Gallen, Switzerland. They were able to isolate the fungus from floating plastic debris found in the North Pacific subtropical gyre, spelled Gyre, colloquially known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Garbage Patch Kids. No. Um, they were then able to grow the fungus in a laboratory on special plastics that contained labeled carbon, which allowed them to calculate the rate at which it broke down polyurethane. Turns out that it breaks down about 0.05% per day. And in the lab, this fungus, with a weird Latin name I'm not going to try to pronounce, only breaks down petroleum polyurethane products that has been exposed to UV light, at least for a short period of time. So what this means is that in the ocean, the fungus can only degrade plastic that has been floating near the surface initially, anyway, right? The article goes on to say large amounts of plastics end up in subtropical gyres, ring-shaped currents in oceans, which seawater is almost stationary. That means once the plastic has been carried there, it gets trapped there. Some 80 million kilograms of floating plastic have already accumulated in the North Pacific subtropical gyre in the Pacific Ocean alone, which is only one of the six large gyres worldwide. There's six of these things, and this one's 80 million kilograms. There's a bunch of plastic. There's plastic in our testicles, guys. I saw this news story not too long ago, unrelated, but apparently this has become a problem.
Speak for yourself, man. I'm not shooting Tupperware out of my nuts. At least I hope not.
No, 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 no. We're armored against that for sure. I didn't save that story, although it would be interesting to reference. Um, but to end, the bacteria or the fungus joins a short list of other fungus, which are also known to break down plastics. So only four species of plastic degrading fungus have been discovered to date, which is like even great news, more good news, right? Like we've got more help to break down all these plastics. There are, however, a larger number of bacteria known to be able to degrade plastic. So this is like some good news on top of good news, in my opinion, really.
I just want to say, Earth, if you're listening to this podcast, I never doubted you for a second. I know you always had my back.
Oh yeah,
Good looking out.
dude, it's something that my wife, Elizabeth, and I were talking about not too long ago was like when you go to make a purchase, right? You're voting with your dollars. So no matter what it is, what product that you buy, you want to make sure that it's quality and that it's being sourced from a good place, right? So we try not to buy anything made out of plastic because, well, you know where it ends up, right? And
Right.
and I keep telling her like, yeah, I know that's ideally yes, but there are solutions to these problems. We're not implementing them. We know about them, right? Because I knew about this fungus thing, or I had heard about one of these four other strains, I guess, before, because I knew the solution existed. But yeah, I don't know. It makes the problem or the issue a little bit less. Um, I don't know. Confrontational is not the right word, but it makes it a little less annoying when you have a solution, right? And you're not just
Yeah.
complaining, you know?
Well, I don't really want to spend too much time in this territory, but the people who follow the climate change agenda and the idea that it's humans that are screwing everything up, they're crazy because they're underestimating the power of nature. Nature always wins. The minute that humans kill themselves, we all disappear from the planet, all the problems go away. Nature's just gonna hit the reverse button. It's always gonna try to fix things that we do or don't do, like geoengineering and stuff like that. Geoengineering is always gonna backfire, and it's never gonna be a perfect science because nature knows best. There's no changing that structure, no matter what you do. So more evidence of that just shows up every day, but these people seem to turn a blind eye to it because maybe the mainstream media didn't say it yet. But you only have to get out in nature or get yourself a fish tank and you'll see that nature takes over very quickly.
For real, dude. She'll take right back over if you give her enough time. I know this firsthand because I live in a forest, and so my house is surrounded by trees, and we've got these wild vines, grapevines, and some other type of weird vine, not grapes isn't like the one you eat, right? But there's this other like big thick vine that will just tear down trees, like it grows up and then just takes over and destroys them. But fighting those back, yeah, nature is relentless, man. And just to touch on the climate thing real quickly, we will get into that when we talk about the brain and um, quote unquote climate change, right? So more on that later. But for now, let's move on to the second story. Um, this is in we're going to put this in the bucket of death of authority regarding media, right? The mainstream media. I think that this is something that is another thing that we can all look out for and enjoy the show while it happens. So this is from the postmillennial.com, and it's about the Washington Post. So, but they're quoting the Post here. I'm not reading these articles verbatim. I just have a few bullet points pulled out. So per Washington Post, quote, like most news organizations, the Post has lost readers. A decline more acute because the Washington-based outlet boomed with the interest in politics during the Trump administration. The Post's website had 101 million unique visitors a month in 2020 and had dropped to 50 million at the end of 2023. Paper is losing money and losing readers, and this new guy they have put in charge is willing to forego the diversity and social justice demands of his reporters. So I don't want to spend too much time on this story, but uh, apparently Washington Post is in the midst of a restructuring after replacing, I guess it was the first female executive editor, Sally Busby, uh, Post's Washington Post's CEO and publisher currently now, uh, Will Lewis, told staff that it was time to take, quote, decisive, urgent action to set us on a different path. And then this is the crazy thing that gets me about this story. Like, yeah, I'm expecting the media to die, but the reaction from the people that are employed by the Post, which I guess isn't, is not surprising. But one reporter asked Lewis, the new guy in charge, whether any woman or people of color were interviewed and seriously considered for either of these positions that they recently refilled, right? That question, Vanity Fair writes, so they're quoting a third mainstream news source here, got some applause. So everybody was happy that they're asking about, uh, people of color or women. So others questioned why the new interim executive editor was brought on board when that created a scenario where, as one reporter put it, we now have four white men running three newsrooms. So apparently staffers weren't happy. They wanted things to stay how they were, with diversity and social justice at the core of the newsroom's operation. So, so as a business, as a or somebody that works for said business, I would be more concerned with not going bankrupt than, with diversity, equity, and whatever else these people are complaining about. But um, we could lump this into the good news portion, right? We try to have at least one good news story. So maybe this is a second good news story. I don't know. But yeah, not too much time on that story. However, this next one falls into the bucket of the downfall of religion, I guess you could say. This comes from the Catholic World Report. First, before I get into this, um, how familiar are the both of you with the Jesuits?
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Okay, so you've got
Are we talking the modern version or like the old dudes in robes and sandals?
modern, the order of,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. I haven't paid much attention to that, just the other ones. So,
Okay. So someone somewhat familiar, maybe gone down the rabbit hole a little bit, but This is from the Catholic World Report, and this is Father Julio Fernandez Echera, a Jesuit priest and rector of the Catholic University of Uruguay, has written a widely circulated critical essay about the Society of Jesus. He warns that the order founded by St. Ignatius of Loyola in 1534 is in deep decline. He says for a long time that he has felt dissatisfied with the situation of the Society of Jesus, while making it clear that he is not going through a vocational crisis, nor is he thinking about leaving, right? So it's in trouble, is in profound decline, but he's staying, just to make that clear. He says that the society is experiencing very worrying situations that seem not to have been addressed in the congregation of procurators and that do not appear clearly and are not taken up in the de statut report. To give some examples, in December of 2020, we learned about what an Italian Jesuit called the Rupnik tsunami, Fernandez noted in his essay. Marco Rupnik is a priest who was expelled from the Society of Jesus in 2023, accused since 2018 of having committed serious sexual, spiritual, and psychological abuse against at least 20 women in the Loyola community that he co-founded in Slovenia. But this guy still appears as a Jesuit and Vatican consultant in the 2024 Pontifical Yearbook. So he's still around, still doing stuff. Fernandez then referred to the scandal of sexual abuse against minors committed by some Jesuits in Bolivia and the alleged cover-up by several provincials who were accused by the state prosecutor's office of that country. We have had to find out about everything through the press, and we have not received a single statement or letter from the General Curia explaining what happened or to ask for prayers for the province of Bolivia. The main Jesuit accused in this case is the late uh, Alfonso Pedrajas, known as Padre Pica, who kept a diary about the sexual abuse he committed against more than 80 minors in Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador. Fernandez pointed out in his most recent essay that, quote, the other urgent issues that were not dealt with clearly and forcefully are the drop in the number of admissions to the society, which in the West worsens year by year, as well as the high number of members leaving the order. And he says, quote, in a few years, the society will have disappeared from several European countries and will become insignificant in others in Europe, America, and Oceania. According to Fernandez, the vision of the general report of the Society of Jesus could, quote, perfectly be the view of the world of a secular think tank with ties to a left-wing political party or a progressive non-governmental organization. There are many signs in the current life of Jesuit ministries, in the documents that are published, and the guidelines that are given that give the impression that we are an NGO and not a religious order, Fernandez pointed out. I think our attitude is suicidal. We want vocations for the priesthood in the society, but we don't want to talk about being priests, he points out. And end of article there. I wonder why they don't want to talk about being priests. Is it because, okay, I'm not going to say they're all committing these heinous acts, but he said that even the members within the society are hearing about this stuff from the press and not their own, order, right? So I don't know, it's kind of interesting. And given that the current pope is actually a Jesuit, I think that makes it even more interesting. Um, I do not have a bone to pick with Catholics. In fact, I grew up Catholic and I went to seminary for a few months, so I do feel like I kind of have license to talk about these things. Um, and this will also pertain to the next story in this segment, which I'll go ahead and just read through, and then maybe we can comment on the last two if anybody has anything to add. So this next one is from thegatewaypundit.com, and apparently Pope Francis decided to have the first World Children's Day in Rome. This was the inaugural World Children's Day, and they asked a drag queen to be there and perform on stage, right? So, World Children's Day featured a male performer who danced in drag for children at Olympic Stadium in Rome. That's new to me. I knew about, drag queen story time and whatnot, but I didn't know about drag queen burlesque for children. Who knew? So, my only other, Jahan, do you have something? I saw you unmute.
No, I just unmuted it.
Okay, no problem. Um, the only other point I had from this that I got from this article that I wanted to share was a comment from Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano. Vig,
I've heard of that guy, yeah.
yeah, dude, this guy is a badass. Um, he was the former apostolic nuncio to the United States, and so he shared his concerns on this person's participation in World Children's Day on Twitter, formerly known as X, formerly known as Twitter. Excuse me. And so Carlo, Archbishop Carlo says, quote, "This is one of the characters called by the Argentine Jesuit as an entertainer at World Children's Day. It is now clear that Bergoglio, which is the Pope's real name, is one of the main activists of the hellish LGBTQ plus agenda. There are no more words to express the scandal and disgust in the complicity and cowardly silence of the episcopate." And then he quotes uh, from Matthew, "Whoever scandalizes even one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for him if a millstone turned into a donkey's wheel were hung around his neck and he were cast into the depths of the sea." So, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, he's got a YouTube channel actually, and he says some pretty what would be called inflammatory things, but I think it's just mostly what we're all thinking. And it's refreshing to see it's come from, you know, somebody that is actually in a position that might be able to do something about it, right? Not to say that, it's good that it's coming from an authority figure because we're talking about the death of authority, as these ideas kind of get out and spread and people start waking up, right? But yeah, yeah, not going from good news to not good news, I guess. I don't know. So yeah, that kind of falls in the vein of watching organized religion crash and burn. Um, we'll continue to keep an eye on that as things progress. And this brings us to the monarchy in the UK. I'm going to do a couple stories that are related to each other regarding King Charles. So this first one is from dailystar.co.uk, and this has to do with Nostradamus predicting that Charles will abdicate the throne. So the article is about this author called Mario Reading, who is a leading expert on the 16th century astrologer Nostradamus. He claims that the then Prince Charles's divorce from Princess Diana, so when him and Diana were married, he was a prince at that time, and he divorced her, and so he thinks that this would lead to widespread disapproval that will force the new king to abdicate. So Prince Charles will be in his 70s when he takes over the throne, which I thought he already was coronated. Oh, he lost Ben. That's okay. Um, anyway, he'll be in his 70s when he takes over the throne, but the resentments held against him by a certain portion of the British population following his divorce from Diana still persist. So he's going to get the kingship, and then everybody will still be angry at him because of the Diana thing, which will force him to abdicate. He wrote a book, Mario Reading, this expert on Nostradamus, wrote a book in 2005 in which he reinterprets some original predictions made by Nostradamus almost 447 years ago and suggests, and this is a quote, which I'm assuming they're getting from the Nostradamus text. It says, "A man who never expected to become king," end quote, to take the throne. So this has led to the bombshell claim that this might be referring to Prince Harry, or even this Australian guy named Simon Dorante Day, who claims to be the secret son of King Charles and Camilla. That would be interesting. Simon from Australia becomes the next king. Um, so where was I? Mario Reading takes another look at Nostradamus's line, quote, "A man will replace him who never expected to be king." So does that mean that Prince William, who would have expected to succeed his father, is no longer in the picture? Question mark. He says that William, unable to take up the royal role for whatever reason, uh, which would leave Prince Harry by default of process, would become the new king. And that would make him King Henry the Ninth at just 38, right? And then so that's a possibility that we get a King Henry that's 38 years old, or we get this Simon Durante Day guy. No, I say we, but the UK. And but the Simon guy is all for it though, dude. He wants to be the king. He says, quote, "I believe I am the son of Charles and Camilla, and I'm looking forward to my day in court to prove this. Maybe Nostradamus has the same understanding that I do, that all this will come out one day. So go Simon." I bet you he's trying to manifest that so hard right now. Which we'll talk about manifesting in the anchor segment, because that's really what it is about, exploration of method in manifesting. But piggybacking piggybacking on that story, uh, this is from uk.news.yahoo, and this is plans for King Charles's funeral have reportedly been dusted off amid growing concern about his health, according to a new report from the Daily Beast. So we just had this story about him abdicating early, right? Or giving up the throne. You can't abdicate early. That's kind of an oxymoron. But yeah, they've got his funeral plans are ready to go. The outlet Yahoo reports, quote, chatter that King Charles is significantly more unwell than his aides were letting on. So they also spoke to friends of the king who, when asked about his health, said that, quote, "it's not good." On top of this somber news, King Charles's funeral plans were reportedly being, quote, "regularly updated." And there's a document circulating Whitehall about what worked and what didn't work at Queen Elizabeth's funeral. So perhaps King Charles is not going to be around for too much longer. Did Jahan, did you see his unveiling of the portrait? Did you get to look at that news story at all?
I did not. I couldn't care less what the hell this guy does. I hope he dies soon.
Yeah.
I'm just being truthful.
For real, whoever did this guy's portrait, it's all in red, so it looks like he's in hell. It looks like he's burning in hell, this portrait. And then it's got a whole bunch of weird, like goat-headed figures in the background if you mirror the image or invert it or, flip it around. Like it's all types of freaking
Yeah,
crazy, crazy weird.
I'm gonna go ahead and say that's probably not coincidence.
Right. No, totally done on purpose. Like you could tell when he pulled the curtain off of the portrait to make its debut. Like I don't think he had seen it before because he visibly like jumped. Like it made him like flinch when he saw it. It was
Mhm.
really weird. And there's also like this. They painted a little tiny butterfly over one of his shoulders, and this is allegedly supposed to be a reference to MK Ultra, which we'll get into when we talk about brains. Which brings us to the last story we will talk about before getting into the brain thing. But this story is from interestingengineering.com, and it has to do with the world's first living computer in Switzerland. So there's a Swiss technology firm called Final Spark that has successfully launched Neuro Platform. And this is the world's first bioprocessing platform where human brain organoids or lab grown miniaturized versions of organs, that's what an organoid is, they perform computational tasks instead of silicone chips. So we're using human brain organoids to do computations instead of silicone. The first such facility of its kind hosts the processing prowess of 16 brain organoids, which the company claims uses 1 million times less power than their silicone counterparts. So that's good, right? Less power. We're not done yet. Hold on. Silicone chips are energy hoggers. And as applications such as developing artificial intelligence models increase, the impact of these inefficiencies is also becoming more glaring. According to Final Spark's estimates, training the popular large language model GPT-3 that powered Chat GPT in its initial days alone consumed 10 gigawatts of or giga gigawatt watt hertz. I don't know what that unit of measurement is of energy. It's a capital G, capital W, small h. And apparently, this is a whopping 6,000 times more energy than an average European city consumes in an entire year. So definitely big energy savings using these brain organoids, what they're calling them? Yeah, organoids. So how does neural platform work? Since the neural platform uses human brain tissue to process data, it is essentially a platform where hardware, software, and biology come together. Researchers often refer to such a system as wetware since it involves a biological component. Jahan, are you a fan of Star Trek by any chance?
Never have been.
Okay.
Never seen it.
Okay. I was going to make a reference to Voyager and the gel packs that they used to power that spaceship. Um, anyway, Final Spark has made working these varied components possible through an innovative setup called multi-electrode arrays. MEAs. This is where the three-dimensional masses of brain tissue are placed. Each MEA has four brain organoids that interface with eight electrodes. These electrodes perform the dual role of stimulating the organoids and recording the data they process. Data transfer is done through a digital analog converter with a 16-bit resolution and a 30 kilohertz frequency. A microfluidic system provides life support for the MEAs, and cameras can monitor their overall operation. So they have this system that keeps these little brain things alive. So how long does this bioprocessor work? Final Spark claims its processor will consume 1 million times less energy than a silicon chip. However, the living part of its computing setup also comes with a caveat that it will die and stop working sometime. Organoids live for 100 days. And this is something they had to work up to. At first, they couldn't get them to live for very long, but now that they have some process now to where they live up to 100 days and then it dies. So this gives me the heebie-jeebies. What do you think?
You talking to me?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
The whole thing is creepy.
It
This
is.
whole technology taking over AI, bend over, let's stick a freaking chip up your ass thing is scary as hell. Have you heard that song by Chris Daughtry, Artificial?
I have not.
Hmm. An interesting one to check out because I was surprised that somebody of his status in the music industry would say the things that he says quite plainly in that song, where he's talking about there's not going to be any religion and no beliefs about anything really. Um, I don't really think AI is going to help us do very much of anything. Honestly, it's going to do more harm than good. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
AI itself is way, way overhyped. People think that this artificial intelligence is just floating out there etherically and that it can invade our bodies and take over our minds. Like that this is not the case. This is not possible. This never happens. Right? It
No.
it is restricted by the constraints in which it is given to learn, right? It's not going to read about consciousness and then become self-aware. It's not how it works. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, but its capacity to learn is very scary. Have you seen the video of the robot that um I think this robot went on to blow one of the scientist's face off or something when it got more advanced. But anyway, um it pretty much they started by torturing it. It learned to walk on its own and stuff, and then they cut one leg off, and then it learned how to pick itself up and how to put back on a new leg and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it just got worse from there. I can't remember the story in full, but this thing was way too smart. And I think it attacked one of the scientists or something. That might be scrubbed from the internet now. I don't know. This
Right.
was a while ago. Yeah.
Probably is
So,
scrubbed, but I did hear a story about the military was training some model to fly a jet or shoot a missile or something, and the program had decided that because I don't know something went wrong, and it decided that the operators were the enemy because they were trying to prevent it from they were sending like a cancel code or whatever, so it wouldn't shoot the thing or do something. And so the computer thought that, I need to shoot these guys because they're telling me not to do the thing that I was programmed to do.
yeah.
That's
Yeah, and I think that we only hear a small percentage of the news every day, so who's to say that there's more events like that that we just don't hear anything about? But they want to sell you AI because they want to sell you computers and smart cars and shit. So, I don't know.
yeah, it's all just a power grab. to
Yeah, I think we're screwed.
to try to mess with our minds. The
Yeah.
majority of people probably are screwed. I mean, some of us are will be alive though. Um, but speaking of the brain though, I wanted to talk a little bit about the hippocampus and MK Ultra and chemtrails. I got just a couple pages of notes here from Cliff High's one of Cliff High's videos on BitChute. Jahan, are you familiar with Cliff or any of his work? I know I shared the video with you, but I'm not sure if you've heard of him before. Are you there?
My bad. I was unmuted. Um, yeah, so that's the video you sent me earlier, right? And I said I didn't have time to watch it.
Yeah, but have you heard of him before at least?
Never.
Okay, cool. Yeah, he's a real interesting dude. He died, and then they sent him back, whoever they is in the afterlife. He died of colon cancer, and he's rebuilt his body from I think when they weighed him after he had passed away. It was like he was 120 pounds or something like that, and now he's up to like 180 pounds, and he knows jujitsu, and just a real tough guy. But he also has this web crawling software bot thing technology that he uses to predict um, future events, kind of like remote viewing, but not remote viewing. And I know that his process has gotten kind of a little bit more difficult to do in that it's not entirely legal the way he used to do it. So he's had to make some changes lately, but he was most his most recent video was about the effects of essentially aluminum oxide on our hippocampus and how this affects our memory retention. And so aluminum oxide is a the main component in chemtrails. Um, by far, I know that there are other metals in there like strontium and barium,
Yeah.
but
Well, chemtrails as a whole are dangerous because there's two different types of chemtrails. There's the ones that are the aluminum and barium and strontium and other variations containing nanotechnology and things like that that are just really screwed up. And those ones that kind of are giving people Morgellons and stuff like that
more gallons, yeah.
around the world. But then there's the other type, which is when um labs and stuff. I'm trying to keep this as basic as possible. Labs basically pay your country for use of the airspace so that they can dump toxic chemicals up there because there's no restrictions up there on what you can dump. But
Oh,
with the EPA restrictions in the lakes and the seas and stuff and all that, you can't dump certain things. So basically, it's these chemical cocktails that nobody knows what's in them at all, right?
man.
So we're getting more than just the aluminum and stuff dumped on us every day. At any given time, we actually don't even know which type of chemtrail we're getting dumped on.
Yeah, I mean, how would we? And that's insane. I didn't even think about them offloading just normal waste up there. Like, so
Yeah,
that's kind of news to me. But I mean, it would make sense if they can't dump it in the river or wherever, right? Just
yeah,
put it in the sky.
yep. And so they pretty much just give the government money that they can use to do other stuff, and we don't know about it. It's all feeding into the same control grid,
It is. It goes back.
money and power. Yep.
Yep. And censorship, which I
Yeah.
I don't like. Cliff actually he tried to run real quickly. He tried to run a contest on X, and it was going to be a Chemtrail Awareness Month, and it was supposed to be for the month of May or something like that. And anyway, the idea was to like take a picture of a chemtrail, tag him in the photo or the post or whatever, and then whoever's post got the most likes or re-X's or tweets or whatever, that person would win an ounce of gold. And so he put out this announcement, and weeks went by, and he never got one single notification from X or from Twitter about somebody tagging him in a chemtrail photo. So Twitter is basically just either nobody did it, which I don't believe. I don't believe. I think people did do it. I didn't. Um, should have though. Would have been interesting. Now that I'm talking about this, or B X censored the shit out of that contest, and he didn't hear anything from them. Anywho,
Yeah.
yeah, Cliff's an interesting guy. Um,
Yeah. Well, back to what we were saying though. So we were talking about the heavy metals getting in the brain. It's getting in the brain from so many different places. It's in the sky, it's in the water, it's in all those foods. So yeah, I constantly go on about this. Just stop eating garbage. Just eat simple single ingredient foods. Pretty easy to do, but nobody wants to do it because there's people sitting around in labs again who are just trying to target the reward centers of the brain,
yeah,
basically. And it's all they get paid to do. So, and they're really good at it. Like, you know?
for real. Like Soylent Green, that movie Soylent Green about the people eating other people that drink.
Yeah, bro.
Yeah, dude, that's the fast food industry. I'm convinced that.
Yeah, I used to know a guy that worked at McDonald's and he worked at Burger King and then he worked at Wendy's and he said it was like all the same fake meat in a bag and he actually was like this is Soylent Green. It doesn't even smell fresh. It smells like rotting remains and stuff. I was like, "Oh my God, dude."
Yeah,
It's
it's
like you just squeeze it on the griddle and it
uh,
looks like green goo.
that's that's weird. Yeah. I knew someone that worked at a Taco Bell back in my hometown, and they would get their meat deliveries like really late at night. It was super weird. I don't remember all the details, but there was something shady about that Taco Bell. I never went back. I stopped eating fast food a long time ago. But
Yeah.
there was a time when I did, right? I think we all did. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. Anyway, I wanted so to reshift our focus off of the chemtrails for just a second. I wanted to fumble through this one page of notes and uh, and then kind of pick your brain about the brain and how memory is retained. So, according to Cliff, there's five um, attributes which must be present in order for memory to take hold. So I say 5/6, but the first is the nature of the information. So nature of information, number one. Number two, emotional input. Number three, repetition and rehearsal. Number four is our sleep patterns. Number five is interference. And then number six takes into account age and cognitive health, right? So those last two have an effect on how memory is retained, right? As as well, and along with the first five. But all of these things are present when a memory is retained or made, right? So
Right.
now,
I'm gonna, I'm gonna jump in here and
go
say
ahead.
that that was probably just his interpretation, his way of teaching it. But I would actually simplify that down to the one thing, emotional balance, because again, the brain is just a meaning making mechanism. And sometimes in fact, I shouldn't even say sometimes, the majority of the time, we willingly assign meanings to things that we don't know about based on what's already in our subconscious, or other times we just kind of make things up. Like we try to self-justify things. We have these availability heuristics, as they're called, and whatever we want to continue to think, we pretty much search for the information that's going to validate that thought that we already had. So I think that pretty much everything can be broken down to a spectrum of emotion and emotional reasoning, I should say. And the only part of us that has any ability to filter that is the prefrontal cortex. But we all know how that goes. Like if you're staring at screens all day, your prefrontal cortex gets deactivated and it gets systematically weakened, right? So I think what Cliff is probably trying to say is that that's just his way of teaching it. But I I would say mostly emotions run the show because so much of behavior is reward based, and like limbic system and stuff it isn't just like all amygdala responses or whatever you want to call it. There's positive attributes to things that happen in those places too that for some reason pop psychology doesn't want to really explain to people, because if they did, then they would have to also say that childhood trauma is a joke, and they would have to talk about the spectrum of experiencing trauma and how if you stub your toe, that's not a trauma. So it would, it would greatly put the psychiatric association into trouble and things like that. Like the whole cult of psychology would fall to the ground because they have a tendency of saying things in generalized ways to get people to latch on to those things and believe they're true so they can give you diagnoses and medication, you know? Um,
Pills, yeah.
so, but yeah, so I think that I did see that first part where he was listing those things, and I think that he just kind of broke that down into his specific way of teaching. So for anybody that wants to watch that, you got to put that link at the bottom there so that they understand
Yeah,
exactly what he's talking about in his way and then make up their own minds about it as well.
right. Yeah, good idea. I will
Yeah.
put that in the show notes for sure. Um, but yeah, so he listed, and I agree. A lot of it, when in your reframing of it is as breaking it down, simplifying it to emotional input. Absolutely, dude. That is what was what the anchor segment is all about. And we'll be reading from Neville Goddard. I have a chapter picked out. It's a very short chapter from Neville Goddard um, about acceptance. And yeah, so just foreshadowing the next segments. But have you heard of Neville Goddard before? Are you familiar with Neville?
He's from Barbados, bro.
Yes. I knew there was a connection here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remembered that you were from Barbados, and then yeah, this guy.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, okay, so yeah, we'll get to that in a second. So yeah, back to so we've got these aspects for memory, and then moving into like the structure of the brain itself. So we have the hippocampus, and from my little notes here, I just have that this is essentially the top dog of the brain. This is the task master. So this kind of has control of or trumps all the other parts of the brain. So you mentioned the prefrontal cortex, there's the amygdala, there's the cerebellum and the basal cortex. Then we have these other complexes that aren't areas per se, right? But they're not glands, but the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the pituitary complex, right? And then we have and then the pineal gland, of course, right? But the hippocampus is the main dude. And in Cliff's analogy, this is what bonds thought, bonds. This is what attaches. This is the thing that makes the thought attach to ourselves. This puts the memory in a file format to store it on our internal hard drive. So this could be a thought, it could be, a memory, or a fantasy, something that's implanted, right? Maybe. So whatever it is, this thing writes the file format to store it in our brain. Is that is that how you understand the hippocampus? Briefly,
Yeah,
more or less.
that's some of how I understand it. Um, I think what's being referred to there is imprints, and encoding. So like the memory has basic functions, and it's encoding, storage, and retrieval are the three main functions. There's other stuff that happens as well, but that's all now getting into like the neuroscience and the fine details that confuse the shit out of people where you're talking about neurons and the receptors and how certain neurotransmitters kind of spread out and do different things than what we're actually told they do in the mainstream things. Like they have so many different functions, I guess. And it just depends on the stimulus. So, like encoding is what you were talking about there, where it just pretty much happens anytime you take in information from the outside world. And storage is essentially when you're talking about storage and creating files and stuff, you're talking about long-term memory.
Yeah.
And the retrieval faculty is just our ability to use that stored information so we can actually react to daily life stimulus. Um, so yeah, I don't know what else you want me to say there, but I could talk about
No, yeah, no, I'm just
different stuff.
no, yeah, I know this is a very simplified overview of a very complex, like we're not neurosurgeons here, right? There's a lot more stuff that we're not saying that could be said. I know that, but for simplicity's sake, generally we could say that this is what the hippocampus does. Um, so
Yeah.
so you said the prefrontal cortex that has to do with our vision, right? So this routes the information for our vision. Um, and this
So
also
the
go ahead.
prefrontal cortex is all about higher thought and processing of information. That's where our spirituality and willpower and reasoning, all that stuff is generated from. It's the wise part of the brain,
Wow.
right?
Okay.
But you know how I talk about the television screens in general deactivate that prefrontal cortex. Well, the people that pretty much run the show, they understand all of this so well, even with the people in the labs that they pay to make chemicals that um target your limbic brain. There's just these three brain systems, limbic brain systems actually that you have to understand. And you have to understand that the entire system is all connected to the other parts of the brain. And that's why they target the limbic system because the limbic system, when you can, let's say, fire bullets at that, so to speak, you're targeting the subconscious mind all over. It spreads out from there basically. So the whole limbic brain system is about emotions. And for me, in my work, I can only talk about how I deal with things from my work because I have my own unique approach to helping people. But I just tend to see behavior as a set of emotional responses. And the reason for that is that the limbic system has these three pathways that send and receive information. And then that information is put into some kind of emotion, and it's usually a negative emotion. So the way that your pathways are interacting together is going to dictate your perceptions and your emotions. And it's also going to dictate the resulting behavioral responses to those things, right? So there's three main pathways that I usually focus on is the reward pathway is the first one. And that's made up of neurons that are basically sending and receiving information. And they're taking neurotransmitter information and decoding it. So as you may know, neurotransmitters control you completely. Um, and it kind of goes like this, like the neurons then synthesize the dopamine, which is it's not exactly what it's sold to you as by pop psychology or pop neuroscience. And dopamine is a chemical for communication between the brain systems as well. So it uses this dopamine to send uh this information to different parts of your brain. So um the dopamine is going to like neurons in the middle of the brain, and that's called the ventral tegmental area. And then when those neurons fire, they send more dopamine to the nucleus accumbens, and that gives you feelings of motivation and reward, like the drive basically to want to go do something so that you get a reward in your brain, you know? Um, and then you have like the nucleus accumbens, which is the learning pathway. So let's say you watch a video on Instagram or something and you feel like you learned something. That's what that is. That's the chemicals firing and you're like, "Oh, I feel smart now."
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then you want to go tell everybody what you saw, you know, what you learned. That's what that is. So the nucleus accumbens is also what learns what feels good. So alcohol, whacking off, shopping, whatever that thing is that feels good to you, that's your nucleus accumbens firing off. And that's all a part of the limbic system. It's all a part of one pathway. And so those neurons release what's called endogenous opioid peptides, which are they have the same effect on the brain as morphine and heroin, and you get feelings of pleasure or bliss or accomplishment or whatever from that. So there's a second pathway called the contentment pathway, and that's all connected to how we judge things as being good or bad. And that pathway is actually made up of the prefrontal cortex and the dorsal raphe nucleus. And the neurons there, they produce serotonin and spread it out to various places all over the cerebral cortex, which, as you know, is how we think and process experiences. And so, um, there's a very small percentage of serotonin that's actually produced in the dorsal raphe nuclei. And how that works is, I guess it works differently than what would be in your gut or whatever else. But it depends on the actual function of the serotonin receptors in the neurons that are in the different parts of the brain. I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible. Like that determines how the serotonin actually acts on your brain. Depends on it. So whatever receptor is there, it dictates how it works. So it is not like serotonin only works one way or anything like that. There's so many different ways that it can work. But that would be too much to get into without blowing everybody's brains into pieces. There's a third pathway, which is my favorite to talk about, which is the stress fear memory pathway. And that's because it has these four main areas that um, you work with all the time. In any kind of therapeutic counseling, really, you should amygdala, which is the stress center, and it's communicating with the hypothalamus, which is controlling cortisol. And it's also linked to the hippocampus or the memory center, which is interpreting memories as being good or bad. And then you have the prefrontal cortex, which completes that pathway. And it's supposed to be responsible for stopping behaviors that put you into trouble, essentially. And it's the whole point of being able to think, to judge things as good or bad, uh, good or bad, and is a very big spectrum, right? So it's pretty it's pretty tough to really nail down one thing is being good or one thing is being bad because to somebody something might be really bad and something might be really good. It depends on their experience and how they've been conditioned with certain things. So those four areas together in that stress, fear, memory pathway are what control your overall behaviors. It doesn't matter what's going on. So the reason I like to focus on the stress, fear, memory pathway is because the amygdala is controlling fear and the hypothalamus is controlling your hormones and it's sending messages to your nervous system. Well, the subconscious is the nervous system. So if it's turning on fight or flight and it's turning off your vagus nerve so you can't relax, then you're screwed. And there's probably so many people out there, billions of people who are unaware that they're actually in fight or flight at any given moment of the day because of what the content is that they take in their lives or what their environment is like or their diet or all three of those things and even more, you know? So when you get into talking about the hippocampus and that, the hippocampus and the amygdala are talking to each whether something is good or bad. And remember, I said that's on a spectrum. So in a lot of cases, it depends on your programming, essentially. But for me, programming and conditioning are two different things too. I'll talk about that in a second. Um, so you have all these different memories that you think are good or bad, but how many of those memories are actually your own, and how many of those memories are things that you fabricated because somebody hacked your stress fear memory pathway, right? And um, when you when you really boil it down together, those three pathways are pretty much responsible for generating all of your emotions, and all behavior is reward based. So let's say, for example, if your nucleus accumbens is getting a dopamine signal from gambling or drinking alcohol or watching porn or eating sugar or scrolling on social media or whatever substance or thing that you like, then you're getting these reward signals and you're getting reward emotions, even if the thing that you're doing is really bad for you. So that's why addiction is so prevalent in society. You can get addicted to anything that generates a reward. There's people that are addicted to picking hair out of their drain in their shower, you know? So anything can be a drug for you if there's enough reward. You just have to hack the limbic. So that's what people are doing all the time to us. They're trying to hack these three pathways, and a lot of it is manipulation of things. So when conspiracy theorists talk about programming, they kind of don't even really know what they're talking about. They're kind of telling you like a small fraction of the story, because when that prefrontal cortex turns off, this is where I differentiate between programming and conditioning. Conditioning, like Cliff was saying, is done through emotional manipulation and repetition and those kinds of things, right? But programming are is related to the blanket statements that we tell ourselves on repeat, whether we realize it or not. It's our self justifications. It's all the information that and the decisions that we make, I should say. We just make all that stuff up as we go along, because the childhood programming and the childhood conditioning all stop at age 7. And from 7 to 14, we're trying to work those things out. And from 14 to 21, we're trying to get rid of all the things that didn't work for us when we were becoming teenagers. And then 21 onwards, anything that we don't get rid of by age 35 is a problem for us, right? So, um, it's a real complex system when you think about it, but it's not that it can't be understood. I mean, I think I just did a good job of
Yeah, yeah.
breaking it all down. You know,
Oh, absolutely. It's fascinating stuff. This is why I wanted to have you on the show because you know what you're talking about. I'm just reading off.
yeah, I wrestle with people on these things all day long. So it's like people have this built-in, I don't know if it's a belief that we get passed down to us, or if we just think we have to stick our chests out and be stronger than we really are to put on a face for the rest of the world, or what it is. But we really think that we are our best psychologists and that we know everything that goes on in our brains, but we don't even know the first thing about what we're doing day in, day out. We're just on autopilot, you know? And all these different systems that we just talked about are responsible for those autopilot responses that we have. We don't even know most of the time that we're being targeted, you know?
Yeah, that's the targeting part, especially comes into more of a stark view when we can connect these two things being sprayed into sky and how this these can have an effect on creating stuff like dementia and Alzheimer's and whatnot. But
Mhm.
so the limbic system is consists of the prefrontal cortex and what else would you say? Just to wrap up real quickly, because I'm trying to take notes as you go too.
Oh, yeah. So the prefrontal cortex, the dorsal raphe nuclei, then you have the hippocampus, and you also have the hypothalamus. And did I say amygdala already?
No.
Right. All those things are just talking to each other all day long, because you have those three basic pathways.
And those are all known as the limbic system, correct?
Yeah, that's the limbic brain systems.
Okay, cool. Okay,
Mm.
so what I have is that the prefrontal cortex stores cognitive memory, right? That makes sense. And of course vision. And then the amygdala stores emotional memory. And then the cerebellum and basal cortex, they store complex physical memory. So like physical movements, right? And I
Mm.
think maybe this is where Cliff has this first aspect that must be present for memory to be retained, the nature of the information. So maybe he's breaking it down to
Right.
cognitive, emotional, and physical based off of, I guess, where it's stored. Because we know that.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Perhaps, but like a good example, just to reiterate, is like the TV thing. If you watch a horror movie, you're hacking that stress fear memory pathway. So it's bypassing your prefrontal cortex. So you can't judge it as being good or bad. It's just direct input into the hippocampus, and it's passing through all of those different centers on the way. It's generating stress in the hypothalamus, it's generating stress in the amygdala, and you're learning that, you know, Freddy or whoever is chasing you, and that's a bad thing. So if you catch from the corner of your eye somebody raising something that looks like a sword, you know, you're gonna have an automatic reaction. You're not gonna know why because it's not common in your house. Hopefully, nobody's walking around your house with a sword trying to chop you. But you're gonna have a really strange reaction to it because your hippocampus now remembers that that's a thing. You know, does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's literally how you get programmed or conditioned, I should say, through watching TV. You remember every single thing as if it happened to you. So
Yeah.
essentially, that's the most complex answer to not answer, I should say, the most complex explanation to the simplified statement that the subconscious mind thinks you are the person in the TV, all the characters in the TV, all at
Yeah.
once,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yep. Yep. I. Excuse me. I get to that. Well, Cliff gets to that, especially in relation to how they program people that have been subjects of MK Ultra in
Yeah.
getting to implant memories is the repetition and the rehearsal part of this, how memory is retained. Um,
And they're
but
still doing that to us. They're still doing
oh
MK
yeah,
Ultra on a large scale. And it's not even necessarily through the TV. It's through the use of things like caffeine and stuff. Because caffeine was used to torture people in the MK Ultra experiments as well. You
yeah,
can be walking through the mall, and we're walking past a Starbucks, and there's caffeine that's evaporated in the air. And you breathe that in, and it goes right into your brain. And it doesn't even have to affect you today. It can affect you 3 days from now. You start having a panic attack. You start thinking about things that are really bad, and you have no idea why. It's as a response to the caffeine, right? And you don't even drink coffee. You're just walking past Starbucks. And the same thing goes for
is that because of the smell, you think? Is it because that would tie into
it's
the
because it's because
hypothalamus?
caffeine is a pesticide. It's poison. It's so poisonous that the people who pick the coffee berries have to wear long sleeves and sometimes gloves. And if the rain's about to fall, they all hightail it out of there and get to safety because when the rain falls, the clouds pull up and the humidity changes, it opens up your pores and it absorbs the caffeine on your skin and it'll give you a heart attack.
God, that's horrifying.
Caffeine basically exists to kill the bugs when they land on the plant, and it also kills the competing plants in the area so that whatever it is, whether it be tea or coffee, it can spread out and it'll just kill all of the plants in its way,
That's great.
essentially.
So it's like a
Yep.
weed. It just takes over everything. That's
Yep. And so when you consume caffeine of any kind, within 10 minutes, usually it will reduce brain activity down to zero. So that's why you get that feeling of, my first sip of coffee for the day.
oh, it's because you're shutting your brain off again.
Pretty much.
You
And the
don't.
reason why so many people go to the bathroom after they drink coffee is because they've literally scared themselves. So it's hacked that limbic brain system. It's hacked that stress fear memory pathway. It's pissed off the amygdala. It's creating adrenocorticotrophic hormones in the body, which pisses off your body, and then you literally shit yourself because you're scared. But
That,
you don't know it because you like coffee, right? You don't know that that's the reason. And people's baseline for what makes them fearful or how their body reacts to a threat changes over time after consuming too much caffeine and too much sugar and things like that all the time. You know, I'm telling you, people in these labs know what they're doing.
yeah. Yeah. I did see a story about Folgers shortage today, so maybe that's good news. I don't know. Who knows?
No, because they're just gonna cut it with Robusta, or they're gonna put sawdust in there and stretch their products. That's what they do.
brew some sawdust in the morning. Nothing like the smell of sawdust.
Yep,
Uh,
pretty much.
so the hypothalamus is in charge of smell, which connects it to pheromones, right? Which connects it to breeding. This is how our bodies send signals of attraction back and forth between males and females. This is, this is so that's very important complex in the brain. The thalamus deals with sound, right? So we've got smell and sound here. Um, does the I have written down that the hypothalamus also attaches emotion to thought. Is that something that you would agree with?
I wouldn't disagree, but I would also say that there's other parts of the brain that are responsible for that as well. There's remember there's pathways, and many of these things send information between each other back and forth just based on what chemical is produced at the time. And that's why, like I said, good and bad is a spectrum. Something that could be good for you or pleasurable for you might be the worst nightmare for somebody else, you know?
Right,
Somebody might walk past Starbucks and that pesky pheromone called mocha latte or whatever it is
right.
in the air. And somebody says, "Oh, that smells good. I want some." And somebody else might be like, "Oh my God, that smells terrible," and run away from it, you know? But
Yeah,
that's usually like even people I know that have never drank coffee, they're like, "Oh, coffee smells so good," but I don't know, I just don't want to drink it for one reason or another. So there's people that aren't attracted to certain things, and that's where I guess for the listeners, we differentiate between which neurotransmitter is being produced at the time. Is it one that's going to be pleasurable, or is it one that's going to make you go like, I don't want that.
right. Yeah, because I mean,
Yeah.
smell, it alerts us to things that are dangerous, like
Mhm.
rotting bodies or whatever, right? Get the hell out of there. So this is an important aspect that we should probably pay attention to, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
even certain types of music, like there's no type of music that is safe except for classical music. Everything else is just going to blow out your brain pathways. And depending on your preferences, and your preferences are determined by your neurotransmitter production, obviously. It depends because somebody might like heavy metal and then somebody else might absolutely hate it and want to run away, you know?
right.
So
Yeah,
that's what that's all about, but it's blowing out your brain pathways. It's been found that classical music actually helps to repair those kinds of things, but I think that has a lot to do with the instrumentation, and the tuning of those instruments wasn't exact and all that kind of stuff. That was before everything was in 440, but that 440 theory isn't accurate either because if you press a certain note on a keyboard, you're gonna cycle through the frequencies. So at some point you're gonna hit notes that are good and notes that are tense and notes that are good frequencies and notes that are bad frequencies, you know. But I'll leave that there. I won't get into that. It's anybody that wants to check that out, just go check out uh Royal Rife and things like that, like how he was able to target certain diseases with different frequencies, and then go look at the frequencies of each note on an 88 key keyboard and you'll figure it out for yourself.
yeah. I've heard of that. It's the whole 440 versus 432 hertz, as far as tuning to musical for, industry standards, right? It got
Yeah,
marked
the
with.
way that theory is presented is largely a part of the new age deception. It's to distract people. But if you're playing an acoustic guitar and you're tuned to 440 hertz, you're still fine because you're going to be cycling through good and bad frequencies. If you're playing a song that's on an instrument tuned to 432 hertz, like your guitar again or something, it's going to cycle through good and bad notes. It's just each note is a different frequency. It doesn't matter what your instrument's tuned to. There's songs that like by a Steve Miller band and stuff that people think are in standard tuning, and then when they go to play it, when I say certain people, I mean me. They realize that because I've had to do that before when I was in cover bands years ago. You learn those songs, you realize that he's actually tuned to 432, and playing that song in standard tuning is ridiculous and very hard to do. So, um, But the air can't tell the difference because again, each note, each chord is cycling through the frequencies, and so you can hardly tell.
Right.
Yeah,
So that, yeah, because there's a obviously like a spectrum of frequencies that are contained within the instrument, and each one has its own unique property, right? It's not just the tuning of the 440 or 432. So I get what
yeah.
you're there.
So
Yeah.
the whole theory cancels itself out if you're a musician, really.
Right. Just another side quest slash distraction thing in
Yeah,
this
pretty much. They
world.
get people to kind of panic about stuff like that. The only thing you need to worry about with music is what a person is repetitively saying in their music because that's how they get you. That's how they program you with ideas and of course there's things like the emotional content again, like we were saying, and that's how you encode stuff. And people that's why people will listen to a song that reminds them of a good time, and there's people who listen to a song that reminds them of a bad time because they want to rehearse that memory, right? Or
Mm.
at least their version of that memory. And every time they rehearse their version of that memory, it's subject to change as well.
Mm.
Because you're only taking in 80% of what happens at any given moment. So, you don't really recall things accurately as you think.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
people tend to listen to the music that gives them the emotional response they want. And that's not healthy behavior. We're trained from little to think that that's a healthy thing, but it's really not.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of being programmed, Cliff mentions this one doctor by the name of Carl Rogers. Uh,
Carl Rodgers is a genius.
this he was involved in MK Ultra somehow, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, he basically discovered the key to mind control laid in interrupting the hippocampus. Um, so the hippocampus, as we know, is in charge of, I have written down here, declarative memory. So it deals in facts, not residual aspects of the fact. So
Yeah.
if we think something is a fact, it will write it into memory, right? So
Yeah. A
Carl Rogers,
declarative memory is basically just for to explain that more for people. And a declarative memory is like an explicit memory. It's anything that you can consciously recall. It's like a save file on a computer hard drive,
yeah,
and they're divided into two types. Which are the first type is episodic, which is experienced events, and then the other category is semantic knowledge, which is just ideas and concepts.
yeah. So Rogers discovered that this is an easier way to program people than, as opposed to causing so much trauma that their brain fractures, their mind splinters or whatever,
Hmm.
that they compartmentalize mentally, right? That it's easier to just interrupt the hippocampus
Hmm.
as it takes as it before it writes the memory into long-term storage. So it's the hippocampus is takes it out of short-term memory, right? And then puts it into long-term memory. So if we interrupt that process, right, you won't remember what happened necessarily, right? You will
Yeah,
really just
short-term
want
memory is weird. Short-term memory is kind of like an open tab on a web browser. It'll stay up until you close it, right? And it's kind of like it'll pass on to the long-term memory only if it's something that your brain deems as necessary. So short-term memory just takes any sensory information, it kind of links it to something in that long-term memory storage. But like if you think of something that you ate and it made you feel bad, or something you smelled and you gagged, then that's the short-term memory being registered before it goes into long-term memory. So it'll stay with you for a long time because you had that somatic response to it.
yeah, right. So
Yeah.
the hippocampus is tied directly to the hypothalamus, right, which deals with smell and pheromones. So in order to affect this interruption of the hippocampus, uh, aluminum oxide is used to do this. So if you give
Mhm.
enough the main point of Cliff's video, it was he was saying that if you give enough uh, aluminum dioxide to disrupt your hippocampus, so it can't write declarative memory, and then they're using the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the cerebellum, and basal cortex to write in memory that is created through emotional impact and
Hmm.
repetition and rehearsal. They
Hmm.
then use sleep patterns to set the memory because the memory is in like it's in a buffer state, right? Before
Uh-huh.
we reach the
Yep.
REM stage of sleep. So this is why they're putting aluminum in the chemtrails to disrupt your hippocampus, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's why aluminum has been in a lot of different things for a long time. All these different foods and medications and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yep.
it was from what Cliff was saying, aluminum was first heavily used, started to be heavily used back in 1947, um, in industry, right? And
Which
when
is right
people,
around the time MK Ultra, right?
yep, exactly.
Yep.
And people that were working in these industries, like after they died and their bodies were examined, they found tons of aluminum oxide in their bodies because aluminum oxide likes to bind to plaques, right? To, like the dirty stuff in your body, like think of the stuff on your teeth, right? That's plaque. So it binds to icky things.
Hmm.
So in this, it interferes with our hippocampus. And
Yeah,
so there's no longer in regards to MK Ultra, there's no longer a need to use emotional impact to splinter the mind. That what they do is they use this aluminum oxide stuff, and then they use repetition and rehearsal,
yep,
videos or images that are shown to subjects, and it gets them to think that they're the ones in the video or the image that are performing whatever action, right?
exactly. That's what I've been saying for years, and nobody's listening. I'm sure nobody's listening to Cliff either, but we got to try, right?
Right? Yeah.
People don't want to hear that, you know? We got to remember that like 80% of the population is full of people who are yet to wake up and they don't even really want to. They just want to go to work, come home, be with their families, watch a little TV, drink a little booze, have some sex, eat some snacks, and go to bed and do it again tomorrow. They don't want to think about all this other stuff. It's frightening. So people tend to shut down when you start talking about this kind of stuff. But,
Yeah.
like we were saying before with the declarative memory, it's episodic. It's stuff that you experience in your life, which people tend to break down into traumas, which most of those things are not even really traumas. People can't differentiate anymore between a struggle and a trauma because of the chemicals in the chemtrails or the chemicals in the food. They're so wound up by all those things that they can't really judge things as good or bad anymore. Everything's just bad or on a spectrum of bad. And, maybe one thing will happen one day out of the blue that's good and that's all there is. But most people don't really have happy lives. But that's why the movies are full of the semantic knowledge and different concepts and stuff, because semantic knowledge is just things that mimic your personal information or like colors and numbers and different words and stuff that you can recall those things, but if you don't have any emotional connection to it, it's not gonna stick. So that's really the purpose of having all these like dramas and like I wouldn't even say comedies and stuff, but horror movies and all these things. They pretty much fill the gaps for people. And your mind is always looking to fill the gaps with something. So what do? You give them a bunch of crap to watch on TV that has so much emotional content that it pretty much screws up their ability to process real life, right?
Yeah. To use it when it's actually needs to be used instead of just using it when you're sitting in front of a black screen, black
Yeah,
mirror.
bro. And I mean, it's like, I mean, I like to talk about this one example because it makes me laugh, but it's actually not funny. I had a client that she couldn't stop smoking and she realized that she started smoking in the first place because Bridget Jones is her favorite movie. And she would just like her subconscious was convinced that it was Bridget Jones at certain times. It would just it identified so much with this character that in certain situations that were like um what she was experiencing in her real life, she emulated the behavior of Bridget Jones. So
I-
we eventually had to take her through some processes to stop smoking, change her diet, all kinds of different things.
it's funny how we can attach, where we get our weird quirks from, right? It's, a movie of all things, an actor, right?
Hmm.
It's always so interesting to
Yeah.
explore stuff like this.
People don't want to believe it. And the only people that believe it, it would be inclusive of you. My other clients that have come to me that have gotten over their stuff that realize that, yeah, you got to guard your conscience. You got to stop listening to certain music that you think you like. You got to stop watching certain TV shows, or if not, if possible, all TV and all movies, and just start reading a lot of books. And the weird thing that happens to you when you cut off music and you cut off TV is that those things will come up to you like everyday memories, and you actually have an opportunity to say, okay, well, for what purpose am I holding on to this? And then you just kind of go like, oh yeah, I agreed with that because it was in this movie. I agreed with the emotion, and you can let it go, and it's no longer a part of you. But if you think about it, that's a scary thing because there's so many people walking around on the planet right now that are on autopilot, and they are Sesame Street, or they are Star Trek, or they are Bridget Jones, or they are
Mm,
whatever episode of
yeah.
whatever TV show, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, or Will and Grace, and all those things that were on primetime TV that, you know, are run over and over again. That's why we have reruns. That's why people trust Joe Rogan because, they've seen him in that what was that TV show he was in? I forget the name of it, but
Fear Factor.
no, not Fear Factor. He was in a sitcom before that
Oh,
was really popular, like in the 90s and stuff, early 2000s. Um
I can't recall.
yeah, there's like it once something becomes a part of public consciousness, it creates that trust factor, essentially, is what I'm saying.
Because it's
Things
familiar.
like Friends is one of those things that's a constant rerun.
Yeah.
Frasier, there's always reruns of Frasier. It's because the people that run the show, they want you to become those characters. They want you to take on Seinfeld's bad behaviors. They want you to become Kramer and George and stuff like that, you know?
Programming. Yeah. TV
Yeah,
programming your mind. It's all the same.
yeah,
It's all the
yeah,
same.
pretty much.
Speaking of books, though, uh, for our anchor segment, this is the fourth and final segment of the show. Uh, so the anchor segment is really an exploration of method. And going back to the Toltec wisdom tradition, the other two masteries besides awareness that are talked about in the tradition are the mastery of intent and the mastery of transformation. So in this segment, we're using our intent in order to transform. So we're kind of working on two masteries here. The four agreements that Don Miguel Ruiz talks about in his book they help those four agreements help specifically with transformation. So the segment is dealing with transformation using our intent, right? So we're dealing in matters involving metaphysics, spirit, right? Spirit, dimensions, timelines, consciousness, and thought, right? Thoughts are expressions of consciousness, and therefore thinking intentionally can navigate us towards manifesting our desire and anchoring it into our experiential reality. And so we want effective and efficient use of thoughts. This is the idea behind this component of the show. I have a quote here. Excuse me. I have a quote here from Carl Jung that I like to reference when I intro the segment. It is, quote, the term thinking should, in my view, be confined to a linking up of ideas by means of a concept. In other words, an act of judgment. So this is an act of choice. This is what do you choose to accept? What do you accept, right? And this is actually the title of our chapter from Neville Goddard is acceptance. This is chapter 13 in his book, The Power of Awareness, which was published in 1952. Have you read that particular book, Jahan? I know that you are you are from the same place as Neville Goddard, so I'm sure that you're highly familiar with his work.
Yeah, I've read a lot of his work over the years. I mean, I got into it the same way as everybody else, probably like a stereotypical spiritual awakening, you know. You reading some Neville or you're reading Manly P. Hall or you're reading what's the other guy? Napoleon Hill or yeah, those kinds of things. Francis Scoville Shin, you start reading all that stuff and
Yeah,
it's all along the same line of thinking, you know?
it is. It is.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. And we don't it makes me sad that we don't have celebrities like Neville was back in the day that are going around talking about stuff like this. Like, well, okay, so we have like Tony Robbins and things, right? But wasn't Neville also like like an actor or a singer or something too? Do you recall? I think it was something
I
like,
don't recall that being a part of his
you know, he was
story, no, I don't think
like
so. I could be wrong.
just a lecturer, an author. But
Yeah, I thought he was just a writer and a speaker.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know that he was pretty well traveled. I know he spent time in the United States, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is we've been going through his Power of Awareness book, and the chapters are super short, so it makes it really good for a podcast. Um, so without further ado, this is chapter 13 from Power of Awareness by Neville Goddard. He starts out with a quote from William Blake. Says man's perceptions are not bounded by organs of perception. He perceives more than sense, although ever so acute, can discover. End quote. However much you seem to be living in a material world, you are actually living in a world of imagination. The outer, physical events of life are the fruit of forgotten blossom times, results of previous and usually forgotten states of consciousness. They are the ends running true to oft times forgotten imaginative origins. Whenever you become completely absorbed in an emotional state, you are at that moment assuming the feeling of the state fulfilled. If persisted in, whatsoever you are intensely emotional about, you will experience in your world. These periods of absorption, of concentrated attention, are the beginnings of the things you harvest. It is in such moments that you are exercising your creative power, the only creative power there is. At the end of these periods or moments of absorption, you speed from these imaginative states where you have not been physically to where you were physically an instant ago. In these periods, the imagined state is so real. When you return to the objective world and find that it is not the same as the imagined state, it is an actual shock. You have seen something in imagination with such vividness that you now wonder whether the evidence of your senses can now be believed. And like Keats, you ask, quote, was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep? End quote. This shock reverses your time sense. By this is meant that instead of your experience resulting from your past, it now becomes the result of being in imagination where you have not yet been physically. In effect, this moves you across a bridge of incident to the physical realization of your imagined state. The man who, at will, can assume whatever state he pleases has found the keys to the kingdom of heaven. The keys are desire, imagination, and a steadily focused attention on the feeling of the wish fulfilled. To such a man, any undesirable objective fact is no longer a reality, and the ardent wish no longer a dream. He then quotes from the book of Malachi, chapter 3, verse 10. Prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. End quote. The windows of heaven may not be opened and the treasures seized by a strong will, but they are open of themselves and present their treasures as a free gift, a gift that comes when absorption reaches such a degree that it results in a feeling of complete acceptance. The passage from your present state to the feeling of your wish fulfilled is not across a gap. There is continuity between the so-called real and unreal. To cross from one state to the other, you simply extend your feelers, trust your touch, and enter fully into the spirit of what you are doing. And then he quotes from the book of Zechariah, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. That's chapter 4, verse 6. And then he ends with, assume the spirit, the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and you will have opened the windows to receiving the blessing. To assume a state is to get into the spirit of it. Your triumphs will only be a surprise to those who did not know your hidden passage from the state of longing to the assumption of the wish fulfilled. The Lord of hosts will not respond to your wish until you have assumed the feeling of already being what you want to be, for acceptance is the channel of his action. Acceptance is the Lord of hosts in action. And that's the end of the reading. I do have a few just quick notes that I wrote down in the margins here. I wanted to point out. Do you have any initial reactions or thoughts, Shahan? Anything that pops out to you?
Well, I mean, I don't have any reactions because I've heard all that stuff before, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of like just, I don't know, it makes me sleepy, makes me want to mellow out and chill. So I don't really have anything to add to it per se, you know?
Well,
What he's saying about the emotional response is so true because if anybody wants to listen to my last episode about the language of the subconscious, I talk a lot about how the emotional component is so important. You can't change something that if you don't know how it feels. If you want to feel joy, but you've never really had a happy moment in your life, like your life genuinely just sucks, then you have no idea how to go ahead manifesting that, you know, because you have no emotional reference to it, you
um,
know. So you said that's something you gotta work on. You really gotta sit with the feeling because the subconscious doesn't, like, for example, if I say the stereotypical affirmation, I am enough. Well, if you're accustomed feeling like shit and thinking that you're shit, then you have no idea what the opposite of that is. So repeating I am enough every morning for a year is not going to encode that into your subconscious. You have to understand what it feels like
mhm.
to be enough. I mean, the subconscious mind's language is a blanket statement. It's either I am enough, comma, yes, or I am enough, comma, no. So there's so much to encoding yourself with new thoughts and emotions when you're trying to manifest stuff that there's lots of shortcuts is basically what I'm saying. I think the downfall, not that that's really a good word, but that's all I got for right now because I'm trying to talk quickly, is that with things like Neville and Wallace D. Waddles and Napoleon Hill and stuff, they give you a lot of information, but they don't really give you the full story. Like they don't give you the stuff that would really help you get there quick. You kind of got to get there on the journey. You gotta get on a journey and you gotta work really hard on that journey. That's the only thing I would say. But everything that he says is true, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and this is why this segment, particularly in the show in general, really doesn't have an omega to it. Like there's no uh, end because in order to sit with these feelings, right, this is not something you can do while listening to a podcast. It's not something like you have to do this for yourself on your own time, away
Mhm.
from distractions, right? So this is why I'm kind of shying away from calling this podcast a working, because the last segment is all about how you have to do that. Like no one's coming to save you, right? You have to do this for yourself. But
Yeah.
yeah. Um to
Did we kill Ben? Where is Ben?
Ben had to leave.
Oh,
I'm not sure. We started talking about King Charles and then he left. So maybe there was some weird energy thing happening there. I'm not too
I don't
sure.
know.
But, he I did talk to him this past week and his cell reception was just garbage out wherever he's working in Colorado. So it might have been a network connectivity issue and he couldn't hear us. I'm not sure, but he'll be
Oh,
back.
okay.
He'll be back on the show. Um, yeah, you can't really disagree with Neville too much, but I did want to connect some dots back to the last episode. I know that you weren't here for this, but uh, for anybody that's following along, you may remember that two episodes ago, we Neville was talking about um, interference. Funny enough, because we were just talking about interference with the brain, and in that chapter, he's saying that the one substance is consciousness, and it is your imagination which forms this substance into concepts, which concepts are then manifested as number one, conditions, number two, circumstances, and then number three, physical objects. So, uh, going back to our reading, we have here these periods of absorption of concentrated attention are the beginnings of creative power, the only creative power that there is. So this is the beginning. This is conditions. So we have step one, two, and three of manifestation: condition, circumstances, and then we have the physical reality of it anchoring into your space, right? So um, persisting in, staying in our emotionally charged state. This is, condition, step one. This is the beginning of what you harvest. And this is a creative power. This is an active role as opposed to a passive role, which is step two and three, the circumstances and the physical manifestation. These are passive aspects. Like you don't have to worry about the circumstances or it actually showing up. You just have to know that it's going to show up. And so to me, this is kind of relieving, right? Because you don't have to worry about, like, even though the circumstances may not seem like they're working out, this is where the universe can kind of surprise us.
yeah. You never actually know when it's gonna show up,
Yeah.
but you got to
Yeah.
put in that work though. Like you really gotta dive deep and make sure you go through those steps carefully. Because sometimes people are like, "Oh, why am I not getting my manifestations?" And I'm like, "Ah, because you're greedy. You're not doing the work." You know, you can't get it if you don't really want it,
Right. And you
and
have
you
to know
never
what
know.
it is too. I mean,
And you never know because you got to remove all these different emotional obstacles, or like I said, the programming, which is the linguistic statements that dictate how you think. You got to get rid of all of that stuff because all that stuff is blocking it. And more than likely, you're not aware of it. It takes a long time to figure it all out.
yeah, but we're able, like, as so the show is called Krononaut Chronicles. Krononaut is a time traveler, right? We're
Mhm.
able to move back in time into the past and rewrite these things so that we can heal ourselves. And then we're also able to go into the future and manifest, prepare our place and so when we get there, it'll be manifested, right? Essentially. So, like, we're time travelers. We're going back and forth in the time. We have these abilities. Uh, everybody does. Um, so this time, the time sense and the shock that Neville talks about from coming back to reality after sitting with this feeling fulfilled, uh, he says uh, the shock reverses your time sense. By this is meant that instead of your experience resulting from your past, it now becomes the result of being in imagination, like in the future, right, where you have not yet been. physically. In effect, this moves you across a bridge of incidents to the physical realization of your imagined state. So, moving across this bridge of incident, we could say that this is a bridge of circumstances, right? Incidents create circumstances, right? So, here we have step two of circumstance showing up again before we get to the physical like manifestation of it, right? Um, and then the other thing I had written was on this part of the windows of heaven may not be opened and the treasures seized by a strong will. So no matter how strong your will is, you can't pry open the windows of heaven. But they are open, they're already open. They're open of themselves and present their treasures as a free gift. So once again, this is a passive aspect of manifestation. The only active aspect of it is when you are creating the feeling that you want, right? So the circumstances are passive, and the actual manifestation itself is a passive act. So these treasures as a free gift, a gift that comes when absorption reaches such a degree that it results in a feeling of complete acceptance. So going back to the like, what do we accept? What do we want to accept of ourselves, right? Um, and yeah, acceptance is it's an active, once again, going back to the active versus passive aspects of manifestation. Acceptance is an active thing, although it is something that can be done very passively, right? You can passively accept something, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can passively accept something. You can, but it depends on, I guess, what kind of situation it is, right?
Right.
Um, I think when it comes to self-acceptance, that's one of the hottest topics in my daily work with people. People just don't understand what it feels like to love and accept themselves. Like that's not a part of their subconscious programming. So it becomes hard for them to affirm a way that they do accept themselves and their flaws. They just really don't truly get that everybody's imperfect. It just doesn't sink in for them, you know? So there's a lot of deep personal work that people have to get into around acceptance. There's a lot of different things that block them, like what we call the three R's, which is regret and resentment and rejection and different things like that. And people don't know how to accept the things that they can't get over. Like if they can't accept that they were rejected by someone, they'll screw up any chance that they have of manifesting that true love that they want, for example. They'll actually do everything they can to sabotage themselves because acceptance and fear of rejection aren't working together. You get what I'm saying? Are you
Absolutely.
there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
these are all things that I work on often. Like self-forgiveness is another thing that stops people from accepting where they're at in life and it blocks their manifestations and resentment blocks manifestations and all
Mm.
that stuff. Because we create grudges to keep ourselves safe from people and circumstances that hurt us, you know?
Oh, I like that. We create grudges to keep ourselves safe
Yep.
because we're actually afraid of expressing ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when I'm doing belief work with people, I got to work on resentment a lot to get rid of those things. Because, like, let's say somebody had a tough childhood and they have a grudge against their mother, they're probably going to be really uncomfortable with getting rid of that because that grudge keeps them feeling safe, right?
Right.
So you got to teach them how to live. They have to understand the feeling of living without resentment. And, it's really tough to convince people at first. Like that's why I said sometimes I have to wrestle with people on these things. Um, there's other things too, like people carry regret in relationships and stuff. And, maybe a loved one died or something. This has actually happened before. A loved one died and they didn't get a chance to tell them that they loved them. And so they regretted that. But because they internalized that, they got really ill and they couldn't move past whatever it is in their current life circumstances, so they can't manifest another relationship. with somebody else, you know? These things are very strange. Like you literally never know what's gonna pop up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I have a biofield tuning practitioner, and every time I go and get a session, people are like onions, right? There's like always layers to peel back, and something different pops up every time, and you'll never know what it is. I mean, you might have an inkling, like you could have. I had a premonition of what we were going to work on before I went my first time, and I was exactly right. That's what we did. We did heart work. We did some work around my heart center. So, but yeah, 100%, 100% true. And if listener, if you need somebody to talk to one-on-one, I would recommend Jahan. He's you've heard him here on the show. He's been on 13 Questions. Is somebody that I vouch for personally. So, do you want to tell Jahan? Do you want to tell people like where they can find you if they want to reach out and get in contact with you? If you're still accepting new clients, I don't even know if you are or not, but yeah, tell people where they can look you up.
Oh yeah, you can just email me at self-sabotage info@proton.me. I'd say follow me on Instagram at Jehan Sattaur. That's JehanSattaur, but I don't really post on Instagram. I just don't have time for it. I don't want to participate in that whole system anymore. But you can chat with me on there too if you want to. No problem.
That's how I get
Um,
hold of you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's it, really.
Awesome. Well, yeah, so definitely go check out uh if you need some coaching help, go check out his services and I hope, listener, after taking you through these four components, and Jehan, if you too as well, right? I hope that this is offered a little bit of like a reprise, refreshing, new perspective look at how crazy things are in the world, but how we still have control, right? I hope that it's a reminder of, um, you know, that things are not all that bad. And my hope is that you will add this podcast into your a regular rotation in order for it to be wholesome. I want this to come across as wholesome entertainment. And we've gone through all the four segments now. We've done the awareness, armor, augmentation, and the anchor segment. And so this is kind of a blueprint. You could think of like setting up your day like this. Like first you wake up, you become aware, right? And then you armor, right? And then we go out and learn stuff, augment our power. And of course, we want to carve out some time for anchoring in what we desire. So it's a good, hopefully you find this a good little blueprint or helpful suggestion anyway. And last but not least, please share the show with somebody that you think would appreciate it, somebody that you love, somebody that you care about, right? Also, please rate the show. Um, those little star ratings on whatever app you're using, they go a long way to helping us reach more people. And that's what I'm all about. I'm not asking for donations. I'm not selling anything. Although, if you want to support the show, do buy some shungite from Mystical Wares. It's a wonderful stone that's got a lot of metaphysical properties. I would highly recommend getting some. And be kind to others. Be kind to yourself. And until next time, Chrononauts, carpe diem.